The snow-capped peaks of the Rocky Mountains in Colorado stood like silent sentinels under a slate-gray sky. The kind of winter day where the cold seeped into your bones before you even stepped outside. It was early December, and the air carried the sharp bite of an impending storm, the wind whispering through the pines like a warning. In the remote backcountry near Telluride, where the trails twisted into unforgiving wilderness, a small group of hikers from Denver had ventured out for what they hoped would be a peaceful day on the slopes. Leading the pack was Jake Harlan, a 42-year-old park ranger with a weathered face and a no-nonsense demeanor honed from years patrolling these mountains. His wife, Sarah, a wildlife photographer, followed close behind, her camera slung over her shoulder, capturing the stark beauty of the evergreens dusted in fresh powder. They weren't alone in the vast expanse. Miles away, in a hidden den carved into the side of a ridge, a wolf pack had made their winter home. The alpha female, a majestic gray wolf named Alara by the researchers who occasionally tracked her collar from afar, had given birth to a litter of 4 pups the previous spring. Now, only one remained by her side, a scrappy little male, barely 6 months old, with fur the color of storm clouds and eyes that held a fierce, unyielding spark. The pack's alpha male had been lost to a hunter's bullet earlier in the fall, leaving Alara to raise the survivor alone. They called him Shadow in the wildlife logs, though he answered to no name but his mother's low, rumbling calls. That morning, as the hikers crested a ridge overlooking a narrow valley, disaster struck without mercy. High above, on the steep face of Mount Wilson, an unstable layer of snow, weakened by a recent warm spell, gave way. The avalanche roared to life with a deafening crack, a wall of white tumbling down the slope like a frozen tsunami. It wasn't the massive slide that buried entire villages, but it was enough to swallow everything in its path. Alara and Shadow had been foraging near the base, the pup nipping at her heels as she sniffed for signs of elk in the underbrush. The mother wolf's instincts kicked in too late. She shoved Shadow aside with her muzzle just as the snow engulfed her, burying her under tons of icy debris. Shadow tumbled clear, his small body rolling down the slope until he slammed into a cluster of rocks. Dazed and shivering, he scrambled to his paws, his heart pounding like a drum in his chest. The world had gone eerily silent, the avalanche's fury replaced by the soft patter of settling snow. He let out a desperate yip, his voice thin and piercing, calling for his mother, but only the wind answered. Digging frantically with his tiny paws, he clawed at the snow, unearthing nothing but more cold white. Exhaustion set in quickly. The pup's breath came in ragged gasps, frosting the air in front of his muzzle. He was alone, exposed, and the temperature was plummeting toward 0. Back on the trail, Jake froze mid-step, his gloved hand raised to shield his eyes from the glare. "You hear that?" he muttered to Sarah and their 2 friends, Tom and Lisa, who were bundled in layers of Gore-Tex and wool. The distant rumble had caught his ear first, a sound he'd been trained to recognize in his ranger workshops. Avalanche. Up on Wilson. Sarah's camera clicked instinctively, but her face paled. They'd chosen this route for its solitude, far from the groomed ski runs of the resorts, but now the wilderness felt hostile. As they debated turning back, a faint, high-pitched whine cut through the crisp air, carried on the breeze from the valley below. It wasn't the wind or a bird. It was something alive, pleading. Jake's ears perked up. "What the hell is that?" He scanned the terrain with binoculars, spotting a small dark shape moving erratically at the edge of the slide zone. A lone wolf pup, staggering through the snow, its fur matted and its legs trembling from the cold. "Jesus, it's a baby wolf," Sarah whispered, her voice tight with concern. Wildlife encounters weren't uncommon in these parts, but this was different. The pup was heading straight toward them, weaving unsteadily as if drawn by some invisible thread. It collapsed once, then pushed on, its eyes locked on the group with an intensity that sent a chill down Jake's spine unrelated to the weather. Tom, a burly contractor from Boulder, chuckled nervously, probably just hungry. "Let's keep moving. Don't want to mess with wild animals." But Lisa, a veterinarian from Denver who volunteered at local animal rescues, shook her head. "Look at it. It's freezing. And listen, it's crying for help." The pup's whines grew more insistent as it closed the distance, now only 100 yards away. It stopped, paws slipping on the icy crust, and let out a series of sharp barks, glancing back toward the avalanche debris as if urging them to follow. Jake lowered the binoculars, his ranger instincts warring with caution. Wolves were protected in Colorado, symbols of the wild's resilience after decades of reintroduction efforts. Interfering could mean fines or worse, but leaving the little guy to die felt wrong. "Sarah, you got any of those emergency treats in your pack?" he asked, already unzipping his coat to reveal the radio clip to his belt. She nodded, rummaging for the high-calorie energy bars they carried for long hikes. The pup reached them at last, collapsing in a heap at Jake's boots. Up close, he was heartbreakingly small, ribs visible under his thin coat, his nose crusted with ice. He didn't snap or flee. Instead, he tilted his head up, those golden eyes boring into Jake's with raw desperation. A soft, whimpering growl escaped his throat, and he nudged Jake's leg with his cold snout before turning back toward the valley, barking again, short, urgent sounds that seemed to point directly at the buried slope. "He's trying to tell us something," Lisa said, kneeling down despite Tom's warning. She extended a hand, and to everyone's surprise, the pup didn't recoil. It licked her glove tentatively, then yipped louder, scrambling a few steps away and looking back expectantly. Jake's mind raced. Avalanches often trapped more than rocks and trees, if the mother was down there. He keyed his radio, the static crackling in the frozen air. "This is Ranger Harlan, badge 472. Possible wildlife entrapment from slide on Wilson Ridge, Sector 7. Requesting SAR team and avalanche dogs ASAP." The response from dispatch was immediate but cautious. Teams were stretched thin with the storm rolling in, but they'd mobilize. As the group waited, the pup refused to leave their side, huddling against Sarah's legs for warmth. She draped her scarf over him gently, whispering, "Hang in there, little guy." The wind picked up, swirling snow around them like ghosts, but in that moment, amid the isolation of the mountains, an unlikely bond formed. The pup's pleas had bridged the gap between human and wild, pulling them into a story of survival that none of them could have anticipated. Little did they know, the real test was just beginning. As the first flakes of the storm began to fall, burying the world in white once more. The storm clouds thickened overhead, turning the late afternoon light into a murky twilight that clung to the valley like a shroud. Jake Harlan paced the narrow trail, his boots crunching through the fresh layer of snow that had begun to accumulate, each step a reminder of how quickly the mountains could turn unforgiving. The radio on his belt hissed with updates from dispatch. Teams were en route from Telluride, but the winding access roads were already slick with ice, and visibility was dropping fast. "ETA at least 40 minutes. The voice crackled, sounding distant and impersonal against the howl of the wind. Jake glanced at his watch. 3:45 p.m. Darkness would fall by 5, and with it, temperatures that could freeze exposed skin in minutes. Sarah knelt beside the wolf pup, her fingers gently stroking his matted fur through the scarf she'd wrapped around him. The little guy, Shadow, though they didn't know his name yet, pressed closer, his body heat a faint warmth against her jeans. His whines had softened to intermittent whimpers, but his eyes never left the direction of the avalanche debris, a white scar across the landscape now half a mile downslope. "He's not giving up," Sarah murmured, her breath visible in the chill. As a photographer who'd spent years documenting Colorado's wildlife, she'd seen her share of desperate animals, deer fawns orphaned by cars, birds battered by storms, but this felt personal, like the pup had chosen them as his last hope. Tom shifted his weight, arms crossed over his broad chest, his face a mask of skepticism under the brim of his wool beanie. "This is nuts, Jake. We're not equipped for this. What if the mom's already gone? Or worse, what if she digs out and sees us as threats?" He was the pragmatic one in the group, the guy who fixed roofs and built decks back in Boulder, where wildlife meant the occasional raccoon raiding trash cans. Lisa shot him a look, her vet's instincts overriding any hesitation. "Tom, look at him. He's hypothermic, starving. If we leave now, he's dead by morning. And if there's a chance his mother's alive." She trailed off, pulling a small thermal blanket from her day pack and tucking it around the pup. Shadow nuzzled her hand, his tongue rasping against her glove in gratitude, or maybe just instinctual seeking of salt and warmth. The pup stirred then, lifting his head with a sudden alertness that made them all freeze. He let out a series of sharp yips, more urgent than before, scrambling to his paws despite the tremble in his legs. Snowflakes caught in his whiskers as he tugged at the edge of Sarah's scarf, then bolted a few yards toward the valley before turning back, barking insistently. It was as if he were herding them, guiding them down the slope. Jake exchanged a glance with Sarah. He's not waiting for rescue. He wants us to go now. The ranger in him knew the risks: unstable snow, potential for secondary slides. But the father's instinct, honed from raising two kids who loved these mountains, won out. All right, we move slow, stay on the edges. Lisa, keep an eye on tracks. Tom, you got the probe in your pack? They descended cautiously, the pup leading the way with surprising determination. The trail steepened, forcing them to zigzag through stands of lodgepole pines whose branches groaned under the weight of accumulating snow. The air grew heavier, laced with the metallic tang of ozone from the approaching front. Shadow paused every few minutes, digging feebly at the snow or whining toward the debris field, his small body silhouetted against the white expanse. Sarah snapped photos as they went, her shutter clicking softly, a record of this improbable alliance, the human footprints mingling with the pup's paw prints in the powder. Halfway down, the wind gusted fiercely, whipping Sarah's hair free from her hood and stinging their cheeks like needles. Tom slipped once, catching himself on a root, cursing under his breath. This storm's gonna bury everything. We should have stayed put. But even he couldn't ignore the pup's persistence. Shadow circled back, nipping at Tom's pant leg gently, as if to say, "Hurry." Lisa chuckled despite the tension. He's got more sense than us right now. In the wild, wolves are pack animals. They don't abandon their own. She knew the science. Gray wolves in the Rockies formed tight family units, alphas protecting their young with fierce loyalty. If Ilara was alive under that snow, she'd be fighting with everything she had. As they neared the slide zone, the ground leveled into a deceptive flatness, the avalanche's runout fanning out like a frozen river. The debris loomed ahead, a chaotic jumble of snow blocks, shattered trees, and rocks, some as big as cars. The pup darted forward, nose to the ground, sniffing frantically before pawing at a spot near the edge. His yips turned frantic, echoing off the ridges. Jake pulled out his Avalanche probe, a collapsible aluminum pole from his pack, and began systematically poking the surface, starting where Shadow indicated. "Good boy," he muttered, though the pup couldn't understand. Sarah and Lisa scanned with their eyes, looking for any sign, a dark patch, steam from breath, anything. Minutes stretched into an eternity, the cold numbing their fingers even through gloves. Then Shadow froze, ears perked. A low, muffled rumble emanated from beneath the snow. Not the wind, but something alive. The pup threw back his head and howled, a thin, reedy sound that carried a raw edge of hope. Jake probed deeper, his heart thudding. The pole hit resistance, not rock, but something yielding. "Here!" he shouted. They dug with hands and improvised tools, a trekking pole, the flat of a shovel from Tom's pack. Frantic but careful, mindful of the risk. Snow flew in clumps, revealing a patch of dark fur matted with ice. Ilara's muzzle emerged first, her golden eyes dull but flickering with life. She was wedged under a slab of snow, her body twisted awkwardly, ribs heaving with labored breaths. The alpha female was massive, nearly 120 pounds of muscle and instinct, but now she looked vulnerable, her coat caked in frozen grit. Shadow lunged forward, licking her face with desperate whines, and she responded weakly, her tail thumping once against the confines. Relief washed over the group like a wave, but it was short-lived. Ilara's hind legs were pinned, and blood stained the snow near her flank, likely from the initial impact. "She's hurt bad," Lisa said, her voice steady as she assessed. "Possible fractures, internal bleeding. We need to get her free without causing more damage." Jake radioed for an update. the static nearly drowning his words as the storm intensified. Found the mother, alive but injured. Need vet support with the CR. The response was garbled, but help was coming. In the meantime, they worked in tandem, Tom bracing the snow slab with his body, while Jake and Sarah cleared around her. The pup stayed glued to his mother's side, his small form a beacon of unwavering faith amid the chaos. As the first heavy flakes turned to a full blizzard, blanketing the valley in white, the humans and wolves formed a fragile circle of survival. Ilara's breaths steadied slightly under Lisa's careful ministrations, applying pressure to wounds with makeshift bandages from torn shirts. But time was their enemy. The miracle of discovery hung by a thread, the storm raging as if testing their resolve. Far above, the radio crackled again. Help was close, but the mountains demanded more before they would yield. The blizzard descended with a vengeance, transforming the valley into a swirling maelstrom of white that blurred the line between sky and earth. Jake Harlan's hands, numb despite the thick gloves, gripped the edge of the snow slab, pinning Ilara's hindquarters, his muscles straining as he levered it upward with Tom's help. The wolf's labored breathing filled the tense silence between gusts, each exhale a faint cloud that dissipated into the gale. Shadow huddled against her chest, his small body shielding her face from the driving snow, his whines now a constant undercurrent of urgency. Sarah knelt nearby, her camera forgotten in her pack, using her scarf to dab at the blood seeping from a gash on Ilara's flank. The metallic scent mixed with the crisp pine of the surrounding forest, grounding them in the raw reality of the moment. "Easy now," Lisa murmured, her veterinarian's calm voice cutting through the wind like a lifeline. She pressed a folded bandana, ripped from Jake's spare shirt, against the wound, applying steady pressure to staunch the flow. Ilara's eyes, half-lidded and glazed with pain, flicked toward the humans, a mix of wariness and exhaustion in their golden depths. She didn't snap or thrash. Perhaps the cold had sapped her fight, or maybe the presence of her pup kept her still. Lisa had seen it before in her clinic, animals in distress prioritizing their young over self-preservation. Fracture in the leg for sure, and this cuts deep but not arterial. If we can get her free, she might make it till the team's here. Tom grunted, his face reddened by the cold and effort, sweat freezing in beads on his brow. This slab's heavier than it looks. One wrong move, and it shifts, could bring more down on all of us. He wedged his ice axe under the edge, using it as a makeshift fulcrum, while Jake counted to 3. They heaved together, the snow creaking ominously before giving way with a muffled crack. Ilara let out a low, guttural growl as her legs came free, her body slumping forward into the cleared hollow they'd dug. Shadow yipped in response, nuzzling her neck frantically, his tail wagging in feeble relief. The alpha female tried to rise, her front paws scrabbling against the snow, but her hindquarters buckled, sending a fresh wave of pain through her. She collapsed with a whimper, her massive frame trembling. Jake's stomach twisted. He'd pulled injured hikers from similar messes during his ranger shifts, but this was different. Wild. Unpredictable. "We can't move her like this. Risk of shock." He scanned the debris field, spotting a relatively flat spot nearby, sheltered by an overhang of uprooted pines. "Let's build a windbreak. Tom, grab those branches. Sarah, help me line this with our packs for insulation." They worked in a frenzy, the storm howling around them like an angry beast. Branches were lashed together with paracord from Jake's kit, forming a crude lean-to that deflected the worst of the wind. Lisa monitored Ilara's vitals as best she could without tools, pulse racing but steady, breathing shallow. She pulled a space blanket from her pack, draping it over the wolf's body, tucking the edges around Shadow, who refused to budge from her side. The pup's eyes darted between his mother and the humans, a silent plea in their depths. "You're doing great, boy," Sarah whispered, offering him a sliver of energy bar. He sniffed it warily before gobbling it down, his hunger evident in the way he licked her fingers clean. As the minutes ticked by, the cold clawed deeper, seeping through layers of clothing and turning their movements sluggish. Jake's radio crackled to life amid the static, the dispatcher's voice barely audible over the interference. "Harlan, this is base. SAR chopper grounded. Winds too high. Ground teams 5 miles out, pushing through the pass. Hold position. Medevac, vet en route with Snowcat." Jake cursed under his breath, keying the mic. "Copy that. Animals critical. We need heat sources, stat." The response was a promise of thermal packs and morphine, but it felt hollow against the dropping mercury. He glanced at his group, their faces drawn and frosted. "We're on our own a bit longer. Stay close, conserve energy." Alara's head lifted slightly, her ears twitching at the sound of the radio. She regarded Jake with a steady gaze, not hostile but assessing, as if weighing whether these interlopers were saviors or threats. Shadow mirrored her, pressing closer to her warmth. In the Rockies, wolves had a reputation. Fierce guardians of the wild, reintroduced in the 90s after near extinction, now thriving in packs that roamed the national forests. But up close, Alara was just a mother, battered and broken, fighting for one more breath. Lisa injected a small dose of painkiller from her emergency kit, meant for human use but calibrated carefully, watching as the wolf's tension eased, her growls fading to soft pants. Tom paced the perimeter of their shelter, probing the snow with his shovel to check for instability. "Storm's peaking. If they don't get here soon." He didn't finish, but the implication hung heavy. Back in Boulder, he'd joke about Colorado winters being character building, but this was no powder day at Eldora. Sarah pulled out her phone, futilely checking for signal. No bars, of course, this deep in the back country. She thought of their kids waiting at home, oblivious, warming by the fireplace with stories of Dad's adventures. "Jake, what if we light a signal fire? The smoke might guide them." "Good call," he nodded, scavenging dry tinder from under the pines, bark shavings, dead needles, striking a flint lighter until a spark caught. The flames were small, fed by backpack fuel tabs, but they pushed back the dark, casting flickering shadows on the wolves. Alara's eyes reflected the firelight, a primal wariness softening as the warmth reached her. Shadow crept closer to the blaze, his fur steaming slightly before returning to his mother's side. The pup's presence anchored them all, a tiny spark of life amid the peril. Suddenly, a distant rumble pierced the storm, not thunder but engines. Headlights pierced the whiteout, bobbing through the trees like will-o'-the-wisps. The snowcat's growl grew louder, chains clanking over the rough terrain. The SAR team burst into view. 4 figures in orange jackets emerging from the cab, hauling gear and a stretcher rigged for wildlife transport. Leading them was Dr. Elena Vasquez, a wildlife vet from the Colorado Parks and Wildlife Division, her face obscured by goggles but her voice sharp with authority. "Ranger Harlan, we've got morphine splints and a thermal wrap. Status?" Jake waved them over, relief flooding his voice. "Female gray, approx 120 pounds. Hind leg fracture, laceration on flank. Stable, but hypothermic." Elena dropped to her knees beside Alara, her gloved hands efficient as she assessed. Shadow backed away slightly, hackles rising, but a soft word from Lisa calmed him. The team worked like a well-oiled machine, administering fluids via IV, immobilizing the leg with an air cast, sliding the wolf onto the stretcher with synchronized lifts. Alara bore it with stoic endurance, her tongue flicking out to lick Shadow's ear as he trotted alongside. As they loaded her into the snowcat's heated compartment, the pup hesitated, whining at the door. Elena scooped him up gently. "He's coming too. Can't leave him out here." Shadow squirmed but settled against the vet's chest, his eyes fixed on his mother through the window. The group climbed in after, the machine's engine roaring to life, churning through the drifts toward Telluride's Wildlife Rehab Center. Jake leaned back, exhaustion crashing over him like the snow outside. Sarah squeezed his hand, her smile faint but genuine. "We did it, a miracle, right?" But as the snowcat rumbled down the mountain, the storm still raging, Jake wondered if the real miracle was just beginning. Alara's survival hung in the balance, and Shadow's fate intertwined with theirs in ways none could predict. The Rockies had a way of binding lives, human and wild, in unbreakable threads. The snowcat's tracks carved deep furrows through the drifting powder as it lumbered toward Telluride. The town's lights a faint glow piercing the blizzard's veil like distant stars. Inside the heated cab, the air hummed with the low rumble of the engine and the occasional crackle of the radio relaying updates to base. Jake Harlan sat wedged between Sarah and Tom, his body aching from the cold and exertion, but a quiet satisfaction settled in his chest. Ilara lay strapped to the stretcher in the compartment behind, sedated now under Dr. Elena Vasquez's watchful eye, her massive form rising and falling with steady breaths. Shadow curled in the vet's lap, his small chest heaving as he dozed fitfully, paws twitching in dreams of the wild chase that had led him to these strangers. Elena adjusted the IV drip, her fingers deft despite the cramped space. She'd been with Colorado Parks and Wildlife for 15 years, responding to everything from bear cubs caught in fences to elk tangled in barbed wire. But wolves were rare calls, protected, elusive, and often left to nature's course. "She's a fighter," Elena said, glancing at the group through the partition. "That leg's a clean break. No compound fracture, and the lacerations clotting well. Hypothermia's the bigger worry, but the warming packs are doing their job." Her voice carried the no-frills accent of someone raised in the San Juans, where winters were as much a part of life as the summer wildflowers. Lisa leaned forward from her spot beside Tom, her vet's curiosity piqued. "What's the plan at the center? Rehab and release?" Elena nodded, wiping snow from her goggles before stowing them. "If she stabilizes, we've got a protocol. X-rays, surgery if needed, then monitoring. The pup's malnourished. He'll need fluids and fattening up. DNA swab to confirm pack ties, but from the collar data Jake radioed, she's a Lara, part of the Wilson pack. Lost her mate last season. Poacher, they think." The word hung heavy, a reminder of the thin line between conservation and conflict in these mountains. Hunters and ranchers still grumbled about wolves preying on livestock, fueling debates in Denver coffee shops and statehouse hearings. Sarah watched Shadow, her hand itching for her camera, but respecting the moment's gravity. The pup stirred, lifting his head to peer at the window separating him from his mother, a soft whine escaping his throat. She reached over, scratching behind his ears gently, and he leaned into her touch, his golden eyes softening. "He's bonded to us already," she said quietly, thinking of their golden retriever back home, who greeted them with the same unwavering trust. Jake caught her eye, a small smile cracking his frozen beard. "Yeah. Reminds me of how Max followed me everywhere after we got him. Their kids, Emma and Tyler, would love this story, minus the life or death parts, of course." The snowcat hit a rut, jolting everyone, and Tom gripped the seat. "Hell of a day for a hike," he muttered, but there was no real complaint in his tone. Back in Boulder, he'd recount this over beers at the local brewery, turning skepticism into a badge of honor. The storm eased slightly as they descended, the worst of the front pushing eastward, leaving a crystalline hush in its wake. Telluride's rehab center loomed ahead, a low-slung building on the outskirts, its exterior camouflaged with faux rock to blend into the terrain, floodlights cutting through the night. They pulled into the gated compound at 6:17 p.m., the team spilling out into the biting cold. Technicians in insulated coveralls swarmed the vehicle, wheeling Ilara's stretcher into the exam bay with practiced efficiency. Shadow trotted at their heels, refusing to be carried now, his energy returning with the promise of shelter. The center smelled of antiseptic and hay, a stark contrast to the pine-scented wilderness. Jake and the others were ushered to a waiting area, a cozy room with a wood stove crackling and mugs of hot coffee steaming on a side table. "Debrief in 10, Elena called over her shoulder as she disappeared into the treatment room. Sarah sank into a worn couch, pulling off her gloves to warm her hands. "I can't believe we pulled it off. That pup. He saved her as much as we did." Lisa nodded, scrolling through her phone now that signal returned, already texting her clinic partners. Instinct. Wolves communicate over miles, scent, sound. He knew exactly where to lead us. Tom poured coffee for everyone, his gruff exterior melting a bit. "Guess I was wrong. Little guy's got grit." Jake sipped his, staring out the window at the snow-swept parking lot. As a ranger, he'd enforced rules about non-interference, but today blurred those lines. The miracle wasn't just the rescue, it was the connection, fragile and profound. Inside the exam bay, lights hummed overhead as Elena and her assistant, a young tech named Marco, worked on Alara. X-rays confirmed the fracture, a mid-femur snap, treatable with pins and a few weeks of cage rest. They cleaned the wound, stitching it under local anesthetic, her body responding with the resilience of the wild. Shadow was given a thorough check. Dehydrated, a few bruises from the tumble, but no breaks. He paced the kennel they'd assigned him, nose pressed to the gate, ears perked toward the sounds from the next room. By 8 p.m., Elena emerged, peeling off her scrubs. She's stable. Surgery tomorrow morning. Pins in the leg. Prognosis, good if no infection sets in. She turned to Shadow's kennel where the pup sat alert, tail thumping at her approach. And this one's a trooper. We'll keep them together post-op. The group exhaled collectively, the weight of the day lifting. Jake stood, clapping Elena on the shoulder. Thanks, Doc. Couldn't have done it without you. She waved it off. Team effort. Wolves like her keep the ecosystem balanced. Prey control, biodiversity, worth every blizzard. As the storm cleared outside, stars pricking the ink-black sky, Sarah lingered by Shadow's kennel. The pup licked her fingers through the bars, his eyes bright with a spark of playfulness returning. In that quiet moment, amid the beeps of monitors and the distant howl of wind, the threads of fate tightened. Alara's recovery would test them all. The center's resources, the human's commitment, and the wild bond that had drawn a freezing pup to beg for help. But for now, survival held, a quiet victory in the heart of the Rockies, where miracles hid in the snow. The first rays of dawn filtered through the narrow windows of the Telluride Wildlife Rehabilitation Center, painting the exam bay in soft hues of gold and gray. Outside, the storm's aftermath lay heavy on the San Juan Mountains, a pristine blanket of snow that muffled the world, turning the pines into silent sculptures. Inside, the air hummed with the quiet efficiency of morning routines. The beep of monitors, the clink of surgical tools being prepped, and the low murmur of technicians discussing protocols over steaming mugs of coffee. Ilara lay sedated on the operating table, her massive chest rising and falling under the glow of overhead lights, her fur shaved in patches around the injured leg to reveal the stark white of bone beneath skin. Doctor. Elena Vasquez scrubbed in at the sink, her movements precise as she pulled on sterile gloves, the latex snapping against her wrists. She'd barely slept, crashing on a cot in the staff lounge after the long night, but adrenaline kept her sharp. Marco, her assistant, adjusted the anesthesia mask over Alara's muzzle, monitoring the wolf's vitals on a digital screen. Heart rate steady at 92. Oxygen sats holding at 98%, he reported, his voice calm, but laced with the tension of working on a wild animal that could wake fighting. Elena nodded, glancing at the X-ray images pinned to a light box. The femur fracture clear, jagged but repairable with titanium pins. She's built tough. Rocky's wolves don't survive otherwise. In her years handling cases like this, she'd learned that intervention was a delicate balance. Save the animal without taming it. Release it back to the pack that defined its existence. Across the hall, in a quarantine kennel warmed by radiant heaters, Shadow paced the length of his enclosure, his paws clicking softly on the concrete floor. The space was larger than a standard dog run, 10 by 15 feet, with a raised bed of straw and a window overlooking the snow-draped yard, but it felt confining to the pup's wild spirit. He'd eaten voraciously the night before, devouring a mix of ground beef and nutrient paste that Marco had hand-fed him, his hunger a bottomless pit after days of sparse foraging. Now, with his belly full, restlessness took over. He pressed his nose to the chain-link gate, whining toward the surgery room, his ears twitching at every sound. The metallic scent of antiseptic seeped under the door, mingling with the earthy smell of his own fur, still carrying faint traces of the Avalanche's grit. Sarah Harlan arrived just after 7 a.m., her SUV crunching over the iced parking lot as she pulled up with Jake in tow. They'd left their kids with a neighbor in Denver, promising a quick check-in before heading back to work, Jake's shift at the park headquarters, Sarah's deadline for a magazine spread on winter wildlife, but neither could stay away. "I keep replaying it," Sarah said as they signed in at the front desk, her voice hushed in the quiet lobby. The receptionist, a college intern named Riley with a ponytail and a Parks and Wildlife lanyard, handed them visitor badges. "The way he looked at us out there, like he knew we'd help." Jake grunted in agreement, rubbing his stubbled jaw. "Yeah, feels like we adopted a ghost story." Elena met them in the observation lounge, a glass-walled room overlooking the bays. Her scrubs were fresh, but dark circles shadowed her eyes. "Surgery's starting now. Should take about 2 hours. The pup's antsy, keeps howling for her." She led them to Shadow's kennel, where the little wolf perked up at their approach, his tail giving a tentative wag. Sarah knelt, extending her hand through the gate, and Shadow licked her fingers eagerly, his rough tongue warm against her skin. "Hey, buddy, Mama's getting fixed up. You'll be running together soon." The pup nuzzled closer, his body language a mix of trust and impatience, golden eyes pleading as if understanding her words. Back in Boulder, Tom and Lisa had crashed at a motel after dropping off their gear, but Lisa texted nonstop, updates on wolf rehab protocols, articles on pack dynamics post-injury. Tom, ever the skeptic turned convert, had surprised everyone by volunteering to drive back later with supplies. "Figured the little guys earned some chew toys," he'd joked over the phone, but Jake heard the genuine shift in his friend's tone. These mountains had a way of forging bonds, turning casual hikers into reluctant heroes. In the operating theater, Elena made the first incision, her scalpel gliding through furred skin with minimal resistance. Blood welled briefly, staunched by Marco's suction, revealing the fractured bone beneath. Ilara's body, honed by years of hunting elk through deep snow, responded resiliently. No excessive bleeding, tissues knitting already in anticipation of the pins. "Beautiful alignment," Elena murmured, threading the first titanium rod into place with a surgical drill that whirred like a distant insect. The wolf's history flashed in her mind. Collared in 2018 as part of a monitoring program, Ilara had ranged over 500 square miles, birthing litters that bolstered the Southern Rockies pack. Losing her mate to a poacher's a 308 had left her solitary, raising Shadow alone, a testament to the wild's unyielding drive. An hour in, complications arose. The fracture site showed microfractures from the initial impact, splintered like cracked porcelain. Elena paused, sweat beading under her mask. "Need to reinforce with a plate. Marco, hand me the 4.5mm set." The adjustment extended the procedure, tension thickening the air as the anesthesia clock ticked. Outside, Jake paced the lounge, radio clipped to his belt in case of calls from the field. Sarah watched the surgery feed on a monitor, her stomach knotting at the sight of Ilara's exposed leg. "She's so strong," she whispered, thinking of the mothers she knew, her own sister, raising 3 kids solo after a divorce, or the elk cows she'd photographed herding calves through blizzards. Shadow sensed the unease, his whines escalating into short barks that echoed down the hall. Riley slipped into the kennel with a puzzle toy filled with kibble, distracting him momentarily. The pup batted it with his paws, scattering pellets, but his head kept turning toward the surgery door. In the wild, separation like this meant death. Predators, starvation. But here, humans bridged the gap with their tools and compassion. By 10:15 a.m., Elena sutured the final stitch, her shoulders sagging with relief. "All set. Pins in, plate secured. She's through the worst." Marco wheeled Ilara to recovery, her body swaddled in warming blankets, IV fluids dripping steadily. The alpha female stirred faintly as anesthesia wore off, her tongue flicking out to taste the air, instincts already probing her new reality. Shadow was released into the recovery pen adjacent, separated by a gate that allowed scent and sight but not touch. He rushed to the barrier, nose pressed to the mesh, yipping softly as Ilara's eyes fluttered open. She lifted her head weakly, responding with a low rumble, a mother's call, reassuring and raw. Jake and Sarah watched from the observation window, the scene unfolding like a private ritual. "Look at that," Jake said, his voice thick. Ilara dragged herself closer, despite the pain, her bandaged leg trailing. Shadow mirrored her, their muzzles nearly touching through the gate. The bond, forged in the den and tested by Avalanche and Storm, held firm. Elena joined them, scrubbing out. Rehab starts slow, physical therapy, monitored hunts in the enclosure. If all goes well, release in spring, back to Wilson Ridge. But her eyes held a shadow. Infections, rejection of hardware, or pack rejection awaited in the wild. As noon approached, sunlight strengthened, melting edges off the snowdrifts outside. The group lingered, sharing sandwiches from the center's kitchen, ham on rye, strong black coffee steaming in styrofoam cups. Tom arrived mid-afternoon, arms loaded with donations, blankets, toys, even a stuffed wolf for the kids' sake. Laughter broke the tension for the first time. Tom's booming voice recounting his drive through the pass, chains rattling like old bones. But beneath it, a quiet resolve settled. The miracle of the pup's plea had saved Ilara, but recovery demanded more. Weeks of vigilance, battles against nature's indifference. In the recovery pen, Ilara slept fitfully. Shadow curled nearby, his small form a guardian against the unknown. The Rockies whispered outside, wind sifting through pines, carrying echoes of packs long past. For the humans, the story wasn't over. It had woven them into the wild's tapestry, pulling city lives into mountain rhythms. As afternoon shadows lengthened, hope flickered like the dawn, fragile but unyielding. The days following Ilara's surgery blurred into a rhythm of watchful waiting at the Telluride Wildlife Rehabilitation Center, where the crisp mountain air carried the faint scent of pine resin and distant wood smoke from the town's chimneys. Sunlight streamed through the recovery pen's reinforced windows, warming the concrete floor where Ilara lay. Her bandaged leg extended stiffly on a padded platform. The alpha wolf's golden eyes, once sharp with the vigilance of the wild, now held a subdued gleam, tracking the movements of the technicians with a mix of caution and reluctant dependence. Pain meds dulled the edges of her discomfort, but each shift of her body elicited a low, rumbling growl that vibrated through the air like a warning from deep within her chest. Shadow, ever the faithful Shadow to his name, pressed against the gate separating their enclosures, his small nose twitching as he caught whiffs of her scent, musky and familiar, laced now with the sterile tang of iodine and antibiotics. The pup had gained a pound already, his ribs less pronounced under his storm cloud fur, thanks to the high-protein meals of venison scraps and fortified kibble that Marco hand-delivered twice a day. But confinement chafed at him. He'd paw at the straw bedding, sending puffs of dust into the sunlight, or pace in tight circles, his whines escalating into sharp barks whenever Elena entered to check vitals. "Easy, kiddo," the vet would murmur, slipping a treat through the bars, a chunk of rawhide that he gnawed with fierce determination, his jaws working like tiny pistons. Jake Harlan found himself returning daily after his ranger shifts, the drive from the park headquarters in Montrose a winding ribbon of blacktop flanked by snow-capped peaks that seemed to mock the fragility of life below. He'd park his truck in the lot, the engine ticking as it cooled, and head straight to the observation lounge, where Sarah often waited, her laptop open to edit photos from the rescue. Their conversations flowed easily now, laced with the quiet awe of what they'd stumbled into. "The kids keep asking about the wolf baby," Sarah said one afternoon, her fingers tracing the rim of a styrofoam coffee cup. Steam rose in lazy curls, carrying the bitter aroma that cut through the center's underlying smell of hay and disinfectant. I showed them a couple shots, blurred from the hike. "Emma wants to draw him." Jake chuckled, leaning against the window frame, his flannel shirt rumpled from a day of patrolling snowmobile trails. "Tyler's convinced he's a superhero pup, saved the day by begging hikers." But beneath the humor, a thread of worry tugged at him. Reports from the field trickled in, ranchers near Ridgeway complaining of wolf sightings, livestock losses blamed on the packs. Ilara's release could stir that pot, turning their miracle into a controversy. Elena had mentioned it during a debrief, her brow furrowed over a stack of paperwork. CPW's monitoring public sentiment. Wolves are icons here, but not everyone's cheering reintroduction. Across town, Tom and Lisa had woven themselves into the routine too. Tom, with his contractor's hands calloused from years of hammering nails into Colorado's aspen frames, showed up with practical fixes. A reinforced gate latch he'd welded in his garage, or shelves for the supply room stocked with thermal mats. "Can't have the little guy freezing his tail off," he'd grunt, though his eyes softened when Shadow bounded to the fence, tail wagging like a metronome. Lisa, drawing on her Denver clinic experience, volunteered for therapy sessions, guiding Alara through gentle stretches once the pain subsided. The wolf tolerated her touch with growing resignation, her massive head turning to sniff Lisa's glove before allowing a paw to be manipulated. "Progress," Lisa noted in her journal, the pen scratching softly. She's starting to anticipate the routine. Trust building, slow as molasses in January. One evening, as twilight painted the San Juans in bruised purples, a setback hit like a cold gust through the pen doors. Ilara's temperature spiked during a routine check, her body heat rising to 103. 8 degrees, a fever that flushed her gums and made her breaths come in shallow huffs. Elena's face tightened as she drew blood, the syringe glinting under the fluorescent lights. Infection at the incision site. Damn it. Staph, probably from debris in the wound. Marco prepped antibiotics, the vials clinking like ice in a glass, while Shadow sensed the shift, his barks turning frantic, echoing off the cinder block walls. He threw himself against the gate, small body slamming repeatedly until Jake stepped in, kneeling to distract him with a game of tug on a rope toy. "Whoa, easy there. Mama's tough, like you." The night stretched long, the center's quiet broken only by the hum of the heater and Alara's intermittent whines. Sarah stayed late, curled in an armchair with a blanket, her head nodding against Jake's shoulder. Outside, a light snow fell, flakes dancing past the street lamps like hesitant ghosts. Elena worked through the hours, adjusting IV drips and monitoring the wolf's responses, her scrubs stained with sweat. By 2 a.m. the fever broke, Alara's temperature dipping back to normal, her eyes clearing as she lapped at a bowl of electrolyte water. Shadow settled then, curling into a tight ball on his bed, exhaustion claiming him at last. Word spread through the small community like ripples on a frozen pond. Local news picked up the story, a feature on the Telluride Daily Planet about the miracle pup and his hikers-turned-heroes, drawing volunteers and donations. A bakery in town sent venison treats baked into biscuits, their buttery scent wafting through the halls. Tom organized a supply run to Durango, loading his truck with heating pads and chew bones, the road salted and clear under a brittle blue sky. Lisa led a workshop for the staff on wolf behavior, her voice steady as she explained pack hierarchies, how Alara's alpha status might complicate rehab if Shadow's presence reinforced her protectiveness. As the second week dawned, Alara took her first tentative steps, the air cast clicking against the floor like a metronome of recovery. Shadow mirrored her from his side, yipping encouragement, his energy boundless now that the crisis passed. Jake watched from the lounge, Sarah's hand in his, the warmth of her palm a anchor against the uncertainties ahead. Release loomed, scouts from CPW tracking the Wilson Pack's winter dens, ensuring a safe reintegration. But bonds had formed beyond the wild. Shadow's playful nips at fingers through the fence, Ilara's steady gaze meeting Elena's without a snarl. The pup's desperate pleas on that frozen slope had sparked a chain of compassion, pulling humans into the wolves' world and reminding them of the thin veil between civilization and the untamed heart of the Rockies. Yet, as spring's promise edged closer, whispers of challenge stirred. A poacher's shadow lingered in reports from the ridges, and Ilara's pack might not welcome a scarred alpha home. The miracle held, but the mountains tested everything, their snows hiding both peril and profound connection. Weeks turned into a fragile routine at the Telluride Wildlife Rehabilitation Center, where the relentless pulse of mountain life seeped through the walls. The distant call of ravens wheeling over snowmelt streams, the crunch of boots on gravel as volunteers arrived at dawn. Ilara's recovery progressed in fits and starts, her bandaged leg bearing weight for longer each day. The air cast a cumbersome reminder of the Avalanche's brutal kiss. She moved with deliberate caution now, circling the expanded recovery pen that Elena had approved, a chain link enclosure the size of a small corral, dotted with logs for scratching and a shallow pool fed by melted snow. The alpha wolf's fur had regained its silvery sheen, groomed by Shadow's insistent licks and the staff's gentle brushing, but a faint limp shadowed her gait, a scar etched into her predatory grace. Shadow, bursting with the irrepressible energy of youth, darted around her like a comet, nipping at her ears and bounding through the straw-strewn yard. His coat fluffed thicker against the late winter chill, and his golden eyes sparkled with mischief when Jake or Sarah appeared at the fence. The pup had claimed them as pack extensions, his whines turning to playful yips as he tugged at Jake's bootlaces through the mesh, small teeth grazing leather without malice. "He's turning into a regular lapdog," Jake joked one crisp morning, tossing a rubber ball that Shadow chased with abandon, snow spraying from his paws like confetti. But beneath the levity, Jake felt the pull of responsibility. His ranger logs now included daily notes on the wolves, blurring official duty with personal stake. Sarah captured it all in her lens, her camera a constant companion during visits. The photos evolved from stark rescue shots, matted fur and pleading eyes, to intimate portraits. Ilara sunning on a rock, her gaze distant yet alert, Shadow mid-leap, frozen in joyful arc. She'd submitted a series to a Denver magazine, the editor buzzing about a feature on human-wild bonds. "This could change how people see wolves," she told Lisa over lunch in the center's break room, where the air smelled of reheated chili and fresh-baked cornbread from a local donor. Lisa nodded, wiping sauce from her chin, her vet scrubs rolled at the sleeves. "It's already doing that here. Look at Tom. He's building an outdoor play area for rehab animals, complete with tunnels and scent trails." Tom's transformation was the quietest miracle of all. The burly contractor from Boulder, once quick to dismiss wildlife entanglements as nature's business, now spent weekends hauling lumber up the winding road from Ridgeway, his truck bed groaning under plywood and posts. "Figured if we're in this, might as well do it right," he'd say, hammering nails with rhythmic thuds that echoed across the yard. The enclosure took shape, a shaded run with climbing structures mimicking rocky outcrops, designed to rebuild Ilara's strength without the risks of full wilderness. Shadow tested it first, scrambling up a log ramp and perching triumphantly, his barks a triumphant fanfare that drew smiles from passing staff. Elena oversaw it with a watchful eye, her rounds a blend of science and intuition. Blood work showed Ilara's infection fully cleared, her white count normalizing, and the pins in her leg integrating smoothly. No rejection, a rare win against the odds. But rehab demanded more than physical mending. Psychological scars lingered. Ilara shied from sudden noises, her ears flattening at the rumble of a delivery truck, instincts firing memories of the Avalanche's roar. Shadow, too, startled at shadows, his playful demeanor cracking into wary freezes. "They're healing together," Elena explained during a team meeting in the stuffy conference room, charts projected on a wall yellowed by years of use. "Pack dynamics are key. If we separate them too soon, stress could undo everything." Public interest swelled like a spring thaw. The local news story had gone viral on social media, clips of Shadow's heroic hike shared by outdoor enthusiasts from Aspen to Vail. Donations poured in, cash for vet bills, blankets scented with pine to ease the wolves' transition. A school group from Montrose visited under supervision, wide-eyed kids pressing faces to the viewing windows, whispering about the freezing pup who'd begged for help. Jake fielded calls from CPW higher-ups, their voices crackling over the line from Denver offices warmed by radiators and politics. "Good PR for reintroduction," one supervisor said, "but keep it low-key. Ranchers are rumbling again. Calf missing near Are, fingers pointing at wolves." That tension simmered beneath the surface, a undercurrent as cold as the melting snowpack. Jake heard it in coffee shop chatter during patrols, grizzled locals nursing mugs of black brew at the Telluride Brew pub, muttering about government pets preying on herds. One evening, as he locked up the center after a long day, a pickup idled in the lot, headlights cutting the dusk. The driver, a weathered man in a wool cap, leaned out. "Heard you saved that she-wolf. Noble, but watch your back. Some folks don't take kindly to meddling with the wild." Jake nodded tightly, hand on his door handle, the warning lingering like exhaust fumes as the truck peeled away. Inside, the pens glowed under sodium lights, Ilara and Shadow silhouetted against the fence. The pup slept curled against her flank, her massive head resting protectively over him, breaths sinking in the quiet. Sarah joined Jake at the window, her arm slipping around his waist. "They're ready soon, aren't they?" He sighed, watching a distant coyote's howl light up the night. "Scouts say the pack's denned in a safe spot. No poacher signs lately, but release. It's a gamble." Ilara's marked now, limping. Will they accept her? Elena had confided the risks, alpha challenges, potential exile if the pack scented weakness. Shadow's youth might help, his vitality a bridge, but nature didn't guarantee happy endings. As March winds softened, carrying hints of mud and new growth, the team planned the release. A helicopter drop near Wilson Ridge, monitored by GPS collars refreshed and fitted. Tom welded the transport crate. Lisa packed meds for any post-release issues. The humans' lives intertwined deeper. Weekends rerouted from family barbecues to center vigils, hearts tethered to the wolves' fate. One afternoon, under a sky streaked with high cirrus, Ilara took a full lap of the new enclosure unassisted, her limp barely noticeable. Shadow raced beside her, nipping her heels in mock hunts, the air alive with their shared rhythm. Elena watched from the gate, clipboard in hand. She's reclaiming her power. Jake felt it too, a swell of hope laced with ache. The pup's freezing pleas had ignited this chain, saving not just a mother but awakening something primal in them all. Yet as the release date circled on the calendar, shadows lengthened. A fresh poacher report from the ridges, tracks too human for comfort. The miracle teetered, the Rockies' wild heart demanding one final test of faith. The anticipation at the Telluride Wildlife Rehabilitation Center thickened like the mud in the mountain passes as March gave way to early April, the snowpack receding in uneven patches that revealed the rocky bones of the San Juans. Ilara's enclosure buzzed with a subdued energy, the chain-link fences humming faintly in the breeze that carried the first tentative sense of thawing earth and budding willows. The alpha wolf moved with renewed purpose now, her limp reduced to a subtle hitch that barely slowed her prowling gait. She circled the perimeter methodically, nose lifted to test the air beyond the yard, her golden eyes scanning the horizon as if already plotting her return to the wild. Shadow trailed her like a devoted apprentice, his playful bounds maturing into purposeful trots, his body filling out with the sleek muscle of impending adulthood. Elena Vasquez pored over the latest telemetry data in her office. The small room cluttered with maps pinned to corkboards and a laptop screen glowing with satellite images of Wilson Ridge. The Wilson pack had shifted dens, scouts reporting fresh kills, elk carcasses stripped clean under pine thickets, signs of a stable group of 7, including yearlings from Ilara's previous litter. "They're cohesive," she told Jake during his afternoon visit, her finger tracing a red-marked route on the map. "No fractures from winter losses. If we time it right, she'll reintegrate seamlessly." Jake nodded, leaning against the doorframe, his ranger uniform dusted with trail dirt from a morning patrol. The coffee in his thermos had gone cold, but he sipped it anyway, the bitterness mirroring the knot in his gut. "And the poacher reports?" "Anything solid." Elena's expression darkened, her pen tapping the desk like a metronome. "CPW's got a task force. Game cam's up, but it's quiet. Last sighting was a week ago. Boot prints near a bait site off Highway 145. Could be nothing, or..." She trailed off, the unspoken threat hanging between them. Poaching in Colorado was a federal offense, but out here, where ranches butted against national forest, grudges ran deep. Wolves symbolized everything divisive. Environmentalists hailed them as comeback kings, while cattlemen saw shadows in every howl, their livelihoods nipped at the edges. Jake had mediated those fights before, tense standoffs at public meetings in Durango, where fists clenched over folding tables laden with donuts and agendas. Sarah arrived as the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the parking lot where Tom's truck idled, its bed still piled with leftover lumber from the enclosure upgrades. She'd brought the kids this time, Emma, 10, with her sketchbook clutched under one arm, and Tyler, 8, bouncing on his toes with barely contained excitement. We drew the wolves, Emma announced shyly, holding up pages filled with crayons. Shadow is a fluffy hero with a cape, Alara fierce and majestic amid swirling snow. Sarah smiled, ruffling Tyler's hair. They've been counting down the days, told them it's like releasing a friend back to school. But her eyes met Jake's, conveying the worry they shared, the what-ifs of the wild reclaiming its own. Lisa joined them at the viewing platform. Her clinic shift in Denver cut short for this. She'd become the emotional bridge, her vet's empathy translating the wolves' subtle cues. "Watch her," she said softly, pointing to Alara as she paused at the fence, ears perked toward a distant raven's caw. Shadow sat beside her, mimicking the pose, his tail still but alert. "That's pack language. She's listening for the call home." Tom grunted from his spot on a bench, nursing a thermos of his own. "Built that transport crate bulletproof, double-latched, ventilated. If anyone's coming for trouble, they'll have to go through me first." His words carried the weight of his newfound stake, the contractor's practicality arming him against the intangible fears. The release plan solidified over the next few days, a coordinated ballet of logistics. CPW approved a dawn drop on April 10th, a helicopter from Montrose airlifting the crate to a clearing 2 miles from the pack's core territory. Elena fitted new GPS collars, lightweight, solar-powered, with heart rate sensors to monitor stress post-release. Alara submitted to the procedure with stoic grace, her body tensing only briefly as the buckle clicked around her neck, Shadow whining from his adjacent pen until she rumbled reassurance. Blood draws confirmed peak health. Iron levels strong, no lingering inflammation. "She's ready," Elena declared during the final check, her voice steady but laced with the quiet thrill of success. This could be a model case. Alpha female back in the fold. Pup learning the ropes. But as the date approached, cracks appeared in the calm. A game warden buddy of Jake's radioed in from Ridgeway. Fresh snare lines found near a creek bed, illegal traps baited with deer scent, positioned along wolf migration paths. "Amateur work?" the warden said, static crackling over the line as Jake stood in his truck cab, engine idling on a pullout overlooking the Uncompahgre Plateau. But persistent. Folks whispering about teaching the wolves a lesson after that calf kill. Jake's grip tightened on the mic, the plastic creaking. He thought of Alara's scarred leg, the pins glinting under x-rays like fragile armor. "Double the patrols. I'll loop in Elena. Might need to adjust the drop site." That night, back in their Denver suburb home, the Harlans gathered around the kitchen table, the air thick with the aroma of Sarah's lasagna bubbling in the oven. Emma and Tyler chattered about school projects inspired by the wolves, their drawings taped to the fridge like talismans, but Jake and Sarah stepped onto the back deck after dinner, the city lights twinkling below while the mountains loomed dark in the distance. "What if it goes wrong?" Sarah whispered, her arms wrapped around herself against the evening chill. Jake pulled her close, his chin resting on her head. "It won't. We've got eyes on them. Collars ping every hour. And the pack. She's their blood." Yet sleep evaded him, visions of snares and shadows chasing through his dreams. The eve of release dawned clear and cold, frost rimming the center's fences like lace. The team assembled at 5 a.m., Elena with her med kit, Marco hauling the crate, Tom securing straps with his usual gruff efficiency. Lisa checked Shadow one last time, slipping him a final treat, a venison strip that he devoured with a grateful nudge. Jake and Sarah watched from the helipad, the chopper's blades whirring to life, kicking up dust and loose snow. Alara and Shadow were loaded together, the pup pressing against his mother's side in the dim interior, their breaths sinking in the confined space. As the helicopter lifted off, banking toward the ridges, a radio update crackled. No activity on the cams overnight. Hope swelled, fragile as the first green shoots pushing through soil. But in the cockpit, Elena scanned the terrain below, her heart pounding in rhythm with the rotors. The pup's freezing pleas had led them here, a miracle chain of events binding human resolve to wild survival. Yet the mountains held their secrets close, and as Wilson Ridge came into view, jagged and unforgiving, the final chapter of their story hovered on the edge, waiting for nature's verdict. The helicopter's rotors thrummed like a heartbeat against the dawn sky, slicing through the crisp April air over the San Juan Mountains as it crested Wilson Ridge. Below, the landscape unfolded in a mosaic of lingering snow patches and emergent green. Aspens unfurling tender leaves, creeks swollen with meltwater, carving silver paths through the valleys. Inside the crate, strapped securely to the floor, Ilara sat alert, her massive head tilted toward the vibration, golden eyes fixed on the small window slits that framed the world rushing by. Shadow huddled against her, his body warm and solid, a low rumble in his throat that blended reassurance with the thrill of freedom. The scent of pine and earth filtered through the vents, stirring instincts long dormant in the confines of rehab. Elena Vasquez gripped the co-pilot's seat, her eyes glued to the GPS readout on the dashboard, the screen pulsing with coordinates that matched the pack's latest den site, a rocky outcrop 2 miles east, sheltered by a stand of firs. The pilot, a grizzled CPW veteran named Ray from Montrose, banked gently to avoid a thermal updraft. "Clear drop zone ahead," he said over the headset, his voice steady against the whine of engines. "Winds light, visibility 10 miles. Your call on the hover." Elena nodded, keying her radio to the ground team waiting in unmarked trucks below. "Approaching LZ. No visual on threats. Cams clean." But her pulse raced. The snares Jake had warned about haunted the edges of her focus, invisible snares in the underbrush that could snap shut without mercy. Back at the center, Jake Harlan stood on the helipad, Sarah's hand clasped in his, the chill morning air nipping at their faces. Emma and Tyler pressed against the chain-link fence nearby, bundled in puffy jackets, their breaths fogging the links as they waved at the fading chopper. "They're going home!" Tyler shouted, his voice cracking with excitement, while Emma clutched her sketchbook, a fresh drawing of wings carrying wolves to the wild. Tom leaned against his truck, arms crossed, his usual gruffness softened by the moment. "Built that crate like a tank. They'll be howling by noon." Lisa paced beside him, phone in hand, ready to log the first collar pings. The group had become an extended pack of sorts, hikers turned guardians, their lives rerouted by a pup's desperate whines on a frozen slope. The chopper descended into the clearing, a natural bowl ringed by boulders and scattered with last winter's debris, twisted branches like skeletal remains. Ray held steady at 50 feet, the downdraft whipping snow into eddies that danced across the ground. Elena and a tech named Sophia unlatched the crate door from inside, the mechanism clicking with finality. "Now!" Elena commanded. The side panel swung open, and Ilara surged forward first, her bandaged leg holding firm as she leaped into the powder, muscles rippling under her coat. Shadow followed in a blur of fur, tumbling once before bounding to her side, yipping sharply, a call of pure elation that echoed off the rocks. They paused at the tree line, Ilara's nose high, scenting the air thick with pack markers, urine trails on bark, the faint musk of kin. Shadow circled her, ears perked, his tail a flag of anticipation. No howls answered yet, but the telemetry beeped confirmation. Heart rates elevated but stable, no distress signals. Elena watched from the open door, her breath caught. "Go on," she whispered, though they couldn't hear. The helicopter lifted slowly, giving space, rotors fading to a distant throb as it climbed away. On the ground feed relayed to her tablet, the wolves melted into the shadows of the firs, Ilara's limp barely a hesitation as she led the way uphill. Hours stretched into a tense vigil at the center. The radio crackled sporadically, scouts confirming no human tracks near the drop, the pack's GPS cluster shifting northeast, toward a fresh kill site. Jake brewed coffee in the break room, the pot gurgling like a reluctant ally, while Sarah scrolled through live collar data on her laptop. "They're moving steady, 3 miles per hour. That's purposeful." Emma sketched the scene, crayons flying, wolves reuniting under a sun-dappled canopy. But doubt gnawed. What if the pack rejected the scarred alpha, Ilara's authority? Forged in hunts and dens, could crumble under scrutiny, leaving her and Shadow as lone wanderers in a land of rivals. By midday, the miracle unfolded in fragments. A scout's voice broke over the line, excitement edging his tone. Visual contact. Wilson pack at the elk carcass. 8 total, including 2 yearlings. Alara's approaching from the east, pups right with her. The team crowded around the speaker, breaths held. Through binoculars half a mile out, the scout narrated. Alara emerged from a thicket, head low in submission to the current alpha, a burly male with a notched ear, her tail tucked but body language steady. Shadow hung back, whining softly, but she nudged him forward, presenting him like a gift to the fold. The pack paused, noses twitching, low growls rippling through the group. The alpha circled her, sniffing the collar's fresh scent, then her injured leg. Tension coiled. Alara held still, eyes averted, the wild's hierarchy playing out in silent stakes. Shadow yipped once, darting to nuzzle a yearling sister, his familiarity breaking the ice. Slowly the growls softened. The alpha bumped her shoulder roughly, a test she met without flinching. Then a collective howl rose, deep, resonant, weaving Alara's voice into the chorus, Shadow's higher keen threading through like a promise. Tears pricked Elena's eyes as the feed captured it. The pack tearing into the carcass together, Alara at the flank, her pups, old and new, flanking her. The limp faded in the rhythm of the hunt, her strength reclaiming the wild. Integrated, the scout confirmed. No challenges, she's home. Cheers erupted in the break room, Tom clapping Jake on the back with a whoop that shook the walls. Sarah hugged the kids, their laughter mingling with relief. Lisa checked the vitals, heart rates normalizing, movements fluid. As evening fell, the sun gilding the ridges in amber, Jake drove the family homeward. The San Juans, a silhouette of triumph. The pups' freezing pleas had sparked it all, a chain from Avalanche to reunion, binding strangers in compassion. Alara roamed free now, her pack whole. The miracle not just survival, but restoration. In the rear view, the mountains whispered of endless stories, where humans and wild met in fragile harmony, tested but unbroken.